So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Valeria Buquin Martinez, and I'm the volunteer coordinator for the Madhu Verma Migrant Justice Center. And alongside with Tracy, who's the member of the board, we're here to be presenting the Community Food Mentor Training Program, the Migrant Justice Edition. We are doing it in partnership and in support with Food for All. We put together a lot of engaging informative sessions and workshops to explore intersection of food justice and migrant justice. And it's my honor to be in this first session introducing our first guest speaker, Tata Brainanta, who's going to be introducing why migrant justice is food justice. So a little bit more about Tata. He is a landed immigrant from Indonesia who has lived in Canada for almost a decade now. Having accessed the SERV money in 2020, he was able to shift his attention and energy to learn about temperate climate, human-scale farming, and permaculture. Following his learnings, Data and his friends started a food garden cooperative, Tuasa Cooperative, with a mission of working with the community in a peace and friendship spirit to nurture a decolonized relationship to the land. Data is also engaged in Palestine solidarity efforts in St. John. He is the recipient of the 2023 Brian Beaton Annual Prize for Journalism in Justice. That is also a writer for the MB Media Co-op on Indigenous land struggles and on housing. And he is currently the president on the National Farmers Union. At the end of the session, we'll have 10 minutes for Q&A, so feel free to send your questions and that at the end we'll address them. I'll also be sending more information about the Madhu Center, Data and his work, and of the program and on Food for All in the chat, so you'll be able to have that information and links. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Data.
Thank you, Valeria, for the introductions. And thank you, Tracy, also for hosting the event with Valeria, as well as everybody who joined this session. Thanks for giving me the opportunities to share this information with you. When I heard about this topic, just want to probably make several initial note that it seems to me this is a huge topic. Migrant justice is food justice. So I will try to look at it based on my own experience looking into this issue. Migrant justice here, I kind of interpret it more as a migrant worker, about providing justice for migrant workers and how it's connected to the issue of food justice. Now, and when we talk about migrant worker, in my opinion, we cannot also separate it from workers in general. And in this case, we are talking about workers in the international context and how they move from one location to the other, from one nation states to another nation states. So I mentioned to Tracy earlier, because this is my first time tackling this issue, and I feel like I wish I have more time to research this issue. I apologize if some of the term that I'm using here is something that's kind of new that I made up myself. It's probably not academically accurate. So I will share my screen now. It's all good there. Can you guys see the screen? Yeah, okay. Oops. So first, I would like to mention about the land acknowledgement. I'm here also introduced as the president of the National Farmers Union. Basically, I've been on the their board of director for 2 years, and it's just this year somehow I was elected president, but it's basically board of directors, I would say. So National Farmers Union, the NFU, has a long-standing commitment to act in solidarity with the indigenous people. And we would like to begin by acknowledging that we are settlers on the unceded and traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqiyik, Passamaquoddy, and Penawapsqueez peoples. We understand that Canada is a settlers colonial country and that as treaty people living on unceded indigenous territory, we all have a social and legal responsibility to uphold the treaties of peace and friendship made between the Crown and sovereign indigenous nations. And this treaty was never dealt with the surrender of lands, but with a commitment to living together in peace and respect. So in that spirit, we will start the presentations. Okay. Okay, so when I was first asked to provide my biography, I don't know where to start actually, but I know that there has been a little bit of a biography about me out there in the internet, so that's what I use for, and I give to Valeria for the introductions. And because I thought 40 minutes talk is probably going to be long, I thought, no, maybe I should speak more about my experience, like since I'm not providing uh, like a long biography. So I will share my own personal experience of how I'm, who, who came from Indonesia, ended up here and become basically in a farmers union and also involved in several different activities that was mentioned earlier by Valeria. And after that, I will talk a little bit about food and colonialism. And because I think we have to understand that the issue of migrant workers or migrant justice is an issue of a globalized world. We have to understand that there are a lot of, I mean, the issue is kind of quite coming up to the surface now. We heard about what like down south Trump is doing, talking about eating pets and all these horrible things. He's talking about migrant workers as well. Here in the province, we heard Premier Hicks talking about, we don't want thousands of migrant workers coming to this province. There's already unsustainable, I guess, if I can choose that word, healthcare system and housing system that housing facilities that we have here. So everybody seems to be blaming on the migrant workers. And this is, I found, is quite concerning because migrant workers are basically also ourselves, including, like what some people think, like settler white Canadians. It's all interconnected. Why they're here, and what did Canadians do that makes these people come to Canada? Those are very interrelated. And after that, also about from the same topic, labor and migrations. And this is probably where I will spend most of my time here, where to go from here. So I'm from Indonesia, and now I'm in Canada. I want to start by giving a little bit of a background of when I grew up. I was born in 1979, so that's under the Indonesian presidents. That's also known as military dictatorship era, Suharto. That's the name of the president. Now, he boasted, and I very remember this when I was still small. He boasted that under his leadership, under his military dictatorship later on, we know, compared to the leftist government that preceded him in the 60s. So he came to power because he basically took over the government through a coup and quite very horrible bloodshed against the leftists in Indonesia. He boasted that under uh, right governments, right-wing governments that he led, there is food sustainability or food self-sufficiency. We don't have to import rice anymore, and we even exported rice at some points in the 80s. And this is done through green revolutions. Uh, what do I mean by green revolutions? Is that he came to power in 1966. Before he came to power, it was quite a turmoil uh, political situation in Indonesia because the leftist government at the time, led by Sukarno, and also supported by the Communist Party, among others, also some other leftist parties, are in a Cold War setting. So they are having problems with getting capital and technology from the Western government. Uh, the Western government actually, including through IMF, said that they're willing, but they have to let go some of the kind of socialist principle that is being applied there in the government at the time. So to make the story short, after the leftist government was overthrown, this Western interest, if you can say, IMF, including companies that comes from the West, it's just flooded the country. Mining companies like Inco, which I believe was based in Canada at the time, is one of the biggest foreign investors that came after the leftist government fell. Now other than that, there's also Freeport McMoran is also a mining company. Initially, they mine for coppers, and then they found out there's one of the biggest deposit of gold in Papua in Indonesia. So those things are what happened after the leftist government fell and after the military dictatorship, which was backed by the United States government, which the Suharto dictatorship came to power. He got all the support from the West. On one of the support is capital to carry out the green revolutions. That means, well, what that means for the agriculture sector in Indonesia is that what used to be kind of like a small scale family farms, self-sufficient with heirloom seeds, it's replaced with the introductions of like a genetically modified seeds and fertilizer. So the self-sufficient agriculture prior to the green revolutions in the 70s and 80s are now replaced with an agriculture that dependent on the companies that supplied the seeds and fertilizer. And one of the funny thing is totally different because it's a military dictatorship. It's not those agriculture produce is not supplied by like private companies, but it's supplied by a top-down state cooperative. So it's enforced to people to use that. Now, it did work to boost the productivity of the land, although now we know that it also take away all the nutrients in the soil and the productivity went downhill. At some point, I think around in the 90s or 2000, went downhill like that. Other than that, because of this dependency, it also creates poverty in the rural areas. So the rural population that used to work in the field and they are quite self-sufficient, they're definitely not rich. Now they will have to lose their job because it is so hard to make ends meet just working as a farmers, and they have to move to the urban areas, and that's a process that we often terms of urbanizations, and they become just basically urban poor in the urban area. And that is actually what I witnessed when I grew up as a as a young kid. Everywhere there's beggars, there's poor people, peddlers. Every 5 minutes I see poverty just passing by on my house. Now, not only that they move to urban area, they also move abroad. Move abroad in the forms of migrant workers, if I can say. So in the 80s and 90s is when Indonesian migrant workers starts to be sent to overseas countries. Uh, Many of them actually goes to Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, among others. And why is that? Because Indonesia is a country that has the largest Muslim populations, and especially in the urban area, there's a lot more Muslim population that live there. And there's also sort of a network of Muslim educations, madrasah school in the rural areas. So they are more familiar with the Arabic language. Other than the Middle East, they also were sent to Hong Kong, from what I understand. Okay. Now, with the availability of cheap labor and impoverished workers in the 80s and 90s, the export-led industry that produced garments like textiles, clothings, shoes, they start to come to Indonesia. So some of you who are probably old enough, or it's my age, around 40, 50, but live in Canada, you probably would remember some of the clothing. Now you probably see it's made in China or made in Bangladesh. Previously, many of them are made in Indonesia. And this export-led industry is actually what turns into what we know as a sweatshop. So they have poor working condition, and because it's run under military dictatorship, uh, the trade unions, there is trade union, but the trade union is actually controlled by the government and the owner itself. Now, I didn't know anything about this until I actually entered college and become a little bit political. Yeah. Okay, so at the end of 1990s, as what happened with the booming economy, there's usually a boom and bust, boom and bust. The Asian crisis happened. Why did that happen? There are several explanations. Some of them also said about overproductions of the goods flowing the market. And there's also speculation on the financial sectors that basically is a typical capitalist crisis. And this crisis has made uh, also a political crisis. So it's not just economic crisis, but also political crisis. The corrupt military dictatorship government at the time, who is very nepotistic, so they have families and close relatives and friends. That's where they rely their network in instead of more of a professional network. They got also uh, threatened by the crisis, to the point that, to make long story short, to the point that even the IMF and World Bank or the Western government refused to help them. Uh, they basically see, oh, you're hopeless, we cannot help you. You got to do a fair election or a free elections. So what happened is that the military dictatorship fell. Now, of course, that's also only one aspect. There is also another aspect of a political pressure from the pro-democracy movement, which includes the student movement that I was involved in at the time. Okay, so we call ourselves pro-democracy movement because being in a military dictatorship, we want to create a real democracy. What is we see at the Western countries, we see, like, oh, they are quite wealthy, and it was 1998, so we know that communism doesn't work. Soviet Union failed. So we're looking for what is actually the best alternative that we need here. We don't have the answer at the time. I mean, yeah, there is that Western government, but later on we also found out how that's actually not the answer. And I'm talking about myself here, basically. Okay. So long story short, also I got kicked out from my school for being too political and abandoning my academic studies. So a little bit of tip for you guys who is into political activism. try your best to keep up with your academic studies, no matter how bad it feels when you're really excited with more exciting stuff. Uh, yeah, I got kicked out. Part of the reasons is because after Suharto fell in 1998, we, the students group that I was involved in at the time, we were asking ourselves, so what should we do now? The dictatorship has fallen. We actually did an encampment until he fell, and then he did fall, and then we don't know what to do with the encampment. So we talk about, oh well, we know all this problem, and we see there's some workers came to our encampment. Why don't we go to them? Why don't we go to the workers? Now, that is from my point of view, but what actually happened before that, there were already students that was going to the workers, going to the peasantry to kind of organize them politically. So we joined that political current who kind of want to go back to the people, basically. So we chose, and I chose to go to sweatshop factories. Now, I went there and we decided we're going to organize a strike that will become a way to organize an independent union because the unions that they have are all yellow unions controlled. So we tried to do that, and the sweatshop workers who's also among our age, like in the 20s, they look at us. Oh, look at these students who toppled the dictatorship. They must know something about this. But we didn't know anything about organizing workers. At least I'm speaking for myself, I suppose. And the strike that I was involved in, it was failed. They all got laid off. I feel so bad about that, and I felt like, okay, I have to learn more about this. Now, there is one thing that I want to share with you here. When the strike failed, one of the workers, they were just joking around. They're not mad at me or anything like that. They just mentioned, oh, well, I guess we just have to go back to the village and start to hold the land again. And that really struck me when he said, yeah, it was a guy. He said that because then I realized, when you have no other things to rely on, it's the earth that you can go back to grow your food and start all over again. So that, even though I wasn't in the peasant sector at the time, I took a note of that, and I was like, someday I will learn. Like how this food productions or food workers or going back to the land could be a start of a significant movement. That one thing. But then I was sent to Canada, unfortunately, to continue my study because somehow my parents think I should finish and get away from this whole thing. I went there and I was exposed to Canadian activism. I studied sociology. I took labor study as a major. Uh, and I learned about, among others, LGBT movement. Actually, that's one of the things that really uh, opened my eyes in Canada and Palestine, because we heard about Palestine in Indonesia, but we thought it's a Muslim country, but we thought it's a or the notion at the time is that it's a religious issue. It's between Muslim and Jewish and Christians. But in Canada, I met Palestinians. I talked to them, and they're not religious. Like they are basically the same leftists that I used to hang out with back in Indonesia, and we have the same view. So, and I also learned the reality of what happened in Palestine, Israel. Other than that, it was also, this is around 2000, early 2000. It's also the time when Chavez, the President Chavez in Venezuela came to power and became popular. It seems like the alternative that we are looking for when we saw that the socialism has failed, but the capitalism seems to be pretty mean, Seems like maybe there is actually alternative. I wasn't sure, but many things, but it's still learning. And the other thing also is that I learned about the Cuban experience when they had their own crisis in the 90s, um, when the Soviet Union fell and they basically lost the uh, food imports from Soviet Union as well as the oil oil import from Soviet Union. So they have to really be creative and grow their own food in the urban settings. And the first book that I saw was actually mentioning that there was a permaculture. So that's where I want to actually go to find out more about. This all happened in Canada, in Toronto, I remember, in the bookstore there. So I came back to Indonesia because I had experience learning English. They throw me to become a translator, and I translate for a lot of NGOs and political organizations, including migrant labor organizations, and I kind of learn a little more about the issues, environments. At some point, however, I switched to corporate jobs because I have some criticism on non-profit organizations. To make it short, okay, and then I'm scheming that okay, someday I think this permaculture is what I have to actually pursue. So in 2018, I went back to Canada because of family matters. Actually, I was married to a Canadian, and uh, my ex-wife's parent is dying, so we moved back here, and COVID hits. With COVID, that gives me the reason to actually do what the my labor friends back in Indonesia decades ago is saying, like just go back to the land if nothing can help you. So I learned farming at his farm. So that's where uh, I am now. I feel like I'm actually on that path. I learned farming. I also believe and try to create, I guess, sort of a emancipatory kind of company where everybody owns the company. My experience working corporate job is valuable in the sense that I learn more about accountability, about transparency, but transparency for the sake of the boss, because they want transparent. They don't want people to steal money from them, for example, right? So we have to learn about that. We have to report. And I feel like, oh, how if I do this, but it's for the people, not for the boss. So that's why I thought the cooperative form is something that we should pursue for that. After I kind of form a cooperative, and this is a more of a community-based cooperative. It's not really a farming cooperative because we don't own our own land. We have to work with the community to find a spot where we can farm. Uh, about a year after that, I came across NFU, had discussions with them, and it seems like everything is coming together. All this idea of permaculture, and then there's also agroecology that NFU NBA was Peo Pierre Olivier. If you guys know about him, I had a debate about him about he's into agroecology. I was permaculture. I'm like they're all the same, and we're gonna see about that. Now I know that we are actually talking about migrant labor, but I found that this is also a political and a policy issues that I don't have the capacity at this point to deal into the policy. Like if you ask me, so should we stop migrant workers from coming or should we just give them all permanent resident status? So that's a policy issues. I personally don't have the answer to that. I know what I want. I want them to all come here and get the permanent status. But I think it's better to see it more in a principle way of how we should actually deal with that questions. Well, I guess it's already 20 minutes. I'm just going to be quick on this. So food and colonialism is actually has a very tight relationship. Some people say that spice trade is actually the one that starts colonialism. And by spice trade, I mean spice trade that is done by the European in the 16th and 15th century. Because before that, there was already spice trade. uh, or even food trade or commodity trade, silk and everything, But what differentiates the Western European or European colonialism is that the accumulation of profits is so severe, or I can say severe, that it even is able to start an industrial revolutions, and that will actually bring us to this point now. Okay, what is colonialism? I define it in a for like a practical purpose. It's basically like greed. It's getting more and more of the material things uh, instead of, and we will actually contrast it with some other values, instead of creating a relationship, if we can say that. And in order to actually get as much profit as possible, they have to subjugate like a populations on different locations, right? And in order to do that, they have to they have to justify it by creating what we now know as racism, that people of a different color is actually not human, that they can be exploited, they can be killed, can be bombed or put into famine. Oh, this is what I mentioned earlier. So I also mentioned about Gaza because I thought, things are getting better, at least more humane and humane. But what I witnessed with the war in Gaza, where millions dollars worth of bombs or billions dollars of worth of bomb are just dropped into a very densely populated area, shows that it's still here. Colonialism is still here, and what they want is actually to take over the resources in Gaza. I mean, this is probably could be a long debate if you talk to other people about this. And also with Gaza, we see they are using famine to subjugate the populations. They are destroying the farming area. There is an example in Indonesia of the Moluccans. That is actually the Spice Island. The population of the Spice Island was just all killed. It was a genocide by the Dutch so that they can control the spice trade. And here in Canada, there is a story of how the bisons are exterminated so that there is no food self-sufficiency among the indigenous people in the prairies. Now, and if we talk about the more contemporary settings, the colonialism came in a form of new colonialisms in the sense, to make it short and to make it quick, the South or the developing countries is dependent, like they cannot do anything unless they actually provide or export raw materials, uh, cheap labors to the North. And the North actually, or developed countries, have the power to decide or to dictate the South because they have all the capitals and the technologies. So I think by mentioning this, I hope that we get into a little bit of a picture of why we have migrant workers and such. So colonialism is basically trying to separate the earth or the resource from the people, indigenous people at this point. Disruption of the unity of humankind and nature, and they also separate it through space. We see, there's the Atlantic slave trade, but we have also the kind of like a modern version of that with what happened in the States and in Canada, in North America. And this movement of people are being done through this basically economic oppressions between the south, between the North against the South. Okay, I mentioned a little bit about that. And now we also experience climate change that is also has been moving people around to become climate refugees. Now, since I guess the fall of Soviet Unions and since era maybe since 2000, around 2000 where globalization is happening, we notice that there is some sort of a race to the bottom where cheap labor is seen as a competitive advantage in certain countries in the south. Now, I think this has been challenged now. Certain countries in the south, they actually want to leave this this mindset, including China, I would say. They no longer want to be the source of cheap labor. They develop themselves, develop their infrastructure, and this also happen in other South country. And I hope we see the big picture here in terms of why there's migrant workers. We have to I personally would suggest we come from this point of view that we are in an interconnected global system. If we accept that premise, then no one is illegal because the decision that someone is illegal or not, that is also part of the way to uh, to create this system of exploitation. Right? In terms of Canada, we see that we need people here, and we're not poor countries. Canada is not a poor country. It has the capital, it has the technology. I think we can take this approach of the more the merrier, to be honest. That's uh, that's what I see. And we will go into certain permaculture principle as well here. There is one principle in permaculture that says the problem is the solutions. So if somehow we see that there is a problem with migrant workers here, we see that that is actually the solution. They can actually be the solution of so many things that is needed here in Canada, not just uh, not just labor, but also diversity, for example. Okay. And when I say be kind to all, I think it's important that we have a compassionate approach because if you remember how I define colonialism as, greed, which always wants to take and take and take, based on the mindset of scarcity, like you always need to take, otherwise you're done. Now we have to actually flip that or counter that with a different mindset. Is a mindset of give, mindset that we are actually in abundance. We have all the technology, we have the capital here. Canada is not a poor country. So the next point also is we have to counter this hatred against migrant labor. The feeling that they're different, so uh, they won't be suitable for Canadians, for example, that kind of thing. Those are just fear, or that they eat the fats or so. Those are just fear. That it's a old colonial playbook to use fear to justify exploitation. Okay, so where to go from here? Okay, I think we have some principles already that we already know that we can use to tackle this issue. I mentioned earlier about permaculture and agroecology. Now I'm going to be quickly going through that to see what are they about. We also have, I think, the question that I throw earlier: should we stop migrant worker, or should we do something here by giving them permanent residence? How do you do that? Is there supposed to be a middle way for that, or what? Yeah. Those are questions that not only Canadians experience. I think even in Europe, they are asking the same questions. And then one thing I also want to note here that we have to critically look or reassess our growth mindset. that we have to grow and grow the economy. The problem with that is that what economy that you want to grow? Is it a fossil-based economy, or is it a green economy, or is a caring economy, for example? Now, degrowth, I believe, is quite a contemporary ideas that we have to look into that. I came to, oh, okay, no problem. You're saying, yeah, oops, where is it there? Yeah, I came to a presentation done by Eric Pinault. This is actually in UNB Fredericton. The growth actually concerned also about climate change. This endless growth is not actually good for climate change. Eric Pinault mentioned that food productions or farming is one of the biggest factors that creating greenhouse gas. So he believed that we have to look into producing food in a more kind of small scale and more ecologically friendly. Now you can do that perhaps by just paying migrant workers cheaply, but that's not a good solution. We have to be emancipatory. We have to look at them as equals. We have to look everybody as equals actually. So I just put it here as a note. And basically the National Farmers Union, that's just my note there. Doesn't You can probably take that off. Yeah, so now we're talking about climate. Is it me? Okay. So we're talking about climate crisis. Can you see my cursor here? Or
Yes,
no?
yes.
You can? Okay. So the, I'm not going to go along with this. I'm just going to go briefly. This is actually from IPCC report. I believe it's in 2023 or yeah, 2022 there. I want to stress on this conditions that enable for adaptations to climate change and also to reduce the greenhouse gases and the emissions. I think this is important that they realize social factors, so political and social factors plays a big role in this. So condition that enable is inclusive, diverse knowledge and values. I would add this one of them as also indigenous and family farms, finance innovation, integrating ecosystem stewardships, and all. Okay. Now I'm going to focus on the diverse knowledges and values. I'm going to go over this. There is crisis in farm, what we call a farm crisis. So the blue part here is the farm revenue, and the green part is the realized net income. So the blue part here minus the green ones are basically the money that farmers are giving to or transferring to whoever they pay the bill with, to Bayer Monsanto, to the big companies. There's a decrease on family farm and young farmers. And I just want to show that because then it shows how migrant workers come into play when there is this crisis as well. And we see them, we're supposed to see them as a savior to help to help us dealing with this crisis. Now, agroecology is a farming, but not only farming. It's also include social, cultural, economic, and environmental practice on producing food. The aims is food sovereignty, social justice, as you can see here, returning agriculture back in harmony with human ecology. This ties so tightly to indigenous knowledge as well, and against corporate control. Now, I was going to go over to about the difference between food security and food sovereignty. You can see here, Food security is not holistic. It only see as long as people get food, that's good. With food sovereignty, it's more comprehensive, I can say. You need people to also control food productions, food consumption as well, not just production actually. So there is an element of controls. Uh, I'm going to share this with you anyway, so I'm just going to go through this. You can read it, I think. I don't think we need to go one by one here. I already passed 40 minutes, Valeria. So is that okay?
That's okay. We can still go.
Okay, I'm going to be quick. And if you guys want to come back to this, just let me know on the question and answer session. Okay, so this is La Via Campesina. It's an international organization that promote agroecology. These are the pillars on their document that they issued in 2015. I forgot the title there. Agroecology is way of life, it's ecology and life over commodity, input reduction. So this actually in line with the degrowth mindset that I mentioned earlier. And this is also interesting to note, communal public control of the commons. Uh, to note in the sense that we have to look and explore how can we make things public as much as possible. Things that we see, oh yeah, it's take it for granted. Yeah, that is private, so we have to respect that. But how can we actually make that public? So either knowledge or even like material goods, knowledge sharing, direct fair distribution, political involvement. Okay, I'm just gonna go over here. Now, this is the diagram that explains agroecology in practice. Just to make it short, you see this is industrial food system. This is not agroecology. There's a lot of exploitation here by all these people with hats. And there's also food retailers here that, if you have been following the news, have been accused of raising the food prices. With agroecology, we tries to kind of make this more direct. As you see here, it's just farmers and the community. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna go through this. I think this is so that. Okay. So this is just a continuations of some of the principle that was mentioned earlier, and I'm just gonna go ahead. Okay, this is actually my favorite slide. We are comparing indigenous agricultural practices and colonialism in terms of agriculture. The fact that with colonialism, or what we are actually experiencing now, food and land is commodity. It's things that we can buy, that's just the relationship basically. Now with indigenous practice, food is sacred. And I think this is an important reinterpretations, or yeah, I guess interpretation, revitalizations of a more noble indigenous knowledge. And by indigenous, I don't mean just American indigenous. It also means, like European, Asians. That food is sacred. Why is it sacred? Because it is actually the sacrifice of living beings, either an animals or plants. So they kind of like sacrifice their life in order to nourish us. So food is sacred. And we can extend this even to the context of migrant workers or workers in general, like tomatoes that you buy in superstore, for example, comes maybe from Mexico, for example. It doesn't look sacred, probably. It looks shiny and, fake or whatever because it's sprayed and everything. But it is sacred because there's still the labor of workers who has gone to the field in the middle of the day and hot, and It also is actually quite dangerous to work as a tomato pickers. When I live in Ontario to study, near where I live, Leamington is like one of the tomato capital of Ontario. Now, I heard stories about how migrant workers there just died uh, because of the heat, and then the machine that kind of clear out the plants just kill them because they didn't see there's people who fell there unconscious. There are a lot of horror stories like that. That land is Mother Earth. That's also something that I kind of suggest we try to appreciate. We cannot just think of it as something that you can buy and sell. Diversity is resilience is prioritized than monoculture. There's also holistic, which means that even the act of producing food is a spiritual act. Because why? It takes a whole community to do that, to work together, and just to understand that the food that is on our table is actually a produce of a, yeah, produced by the entire global community is actually would give more meaning, to what we eat, in my opinion. Now, seed saving, that's basically just trying to avoid dependency on a seeds company. So that's better, according to Drake. That's not good. Okay. So, yeah, talking about indigenous knowledge, I'm one of the promoter of land back, and by land back, some people that doesn't understand would say, oh, like I have this land. You want somebody to just come here and say, "It's my land, give it away." That's not how it goes. Actually, land back is basically just to make it quick here. I kind of put it in a dialectical ways, one against the other. Is basically a change of relationship from relationship as a commodity to relationship as a kinship, to Mother Earth, a more sacred ones. And that would also entails that it will be a more caring one. Okay. As well with permaculture, there are some principles that I want to introduce here. I'm just going to go over quickly, but I think we can just focus on this. Care for the earth, care for the people, and care for the future is actually not the main one, because in order to care for the people and the earth, you have to actually set limits to population and consumptions. So, of course, setting limits in a democratic way, you don't see it as a controlling way that some people are sometimes afraid of. Okay. So the aim of permaculture is to design a beneficial relationship among various elements. And beneficial relationship is an important one, because if we talk about migrant workers and how we can relate them to food issues, I I would propose we look into what beneficial relationship that we can actually create with them. For example, I've been talking to Niger, he's a migrant worker organizer in the Acadian Peninsula. As an NFU, what can we do to help migrant workers? He talks about the migrant workers could not access the food bank there because they are not citizens. So we're thinking about that. So how can we do that? Can NFU maybe contact their members in the area to help with that? Or maybe they need like a center that they can safe house. I mean, sorry, a safe house where they can always go to in case they got laid off by their employers. And yeah, those are things that we have to creatively explore. Kind of slow. It's almost done. It's almost done. If it is gonna go. Okay. Yeah, so these are the principles that I would actually invite you to read, but I'm not going to read it one by one here. This is based on permaculture principles. So I took a permaculture design course back in 2020. It was led by Starhawk. Starhawk is an activist in permaculture and also political activist based in California. And he kind of, oh sorry, she kind of interpret the permaculture principles into social context. Everything is connected. It's so relevant with what we're talking here. And that is basically the end. Value diversity, edges and margins. This is kind of like a gardening terms, like the edges are usually the one you should control because that's the more dynamic one. Edges means the meeting between two elements. So people that lives on the edges, like the homeless or the migrant workers who live in the edges between, Canadian society and their home society, they're in between. They are actually a source of solutions, a source of dynamism. So that's something that we have to look into. Small scale, intensive systems. So if you want to start something, starts from small scale, build from the ground up. Okay. That's it. How long
Thank
was
you
it?
so much,
Okay.
Tata.
Sorry
Don't
about
worry
the
about
long presentation.
it. No, it's okay. I'm
Okay.
just gonna open the floor if anyone has any questions. I did get one, but before we get to that, I just wanna let everyone know that in the chat you can find links for more information about Data and his work, Food for All, about the Madhu Center, and I also sent the program for the next sessions and workshops that we're having and the registration link. One of the questions that I got is when it comes to permaculture, is there a way or trainings that someone could do it in an apartment if they don't have access to a land?
I did it in apartment. Yeah. So I did it. I did the permaculture design course in an apartment during COVID, and we do have to make an assignment to design a site. And the site that I use is actually the property next to Hayes. So after I did the assignment, Hayes Farm in Fredericton, northern Fredericton. After that, I kind of do the presentation in front of the Hayes people as well. Yeah. Yeah. Whenever there's a will.
Anyone else has any questions? And I also sent Starhawk link
Oh yeah. Thank you.
the chat as well.
Thank you. And
But
are you going to share the presentation as well?
yes, the
Okay.
presentation will be shared to all of you and whoever registered and couldn't attend as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, we have many other sessions, events, and workshops coming up that we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, Data, for your knowledge and your time. And if you want to learn more about Data, there's a link to his work, and you'll be getting the recording in your email soon. Thank you so much, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Valeria, and everyone.